Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining today's fireside chat. I'm Andrew Neville, Country Manager for WithSecure's North American Business Security Arm. And I'm joining you all from our Manhattan office, and I'm thrilled to be here with Mikko Hypponen to discuss his new book, If It's Smart, It's Vulnerable, which is now available on Audible. And Mikko, I understand there are other translations on their way.
That's right. Greetings to everybody online. Good to have you here, and great to talk about a project I worked on for quite a while. And yes, Andrew, you're right. I've last week signed translation of Deutsch, that's German. It's going to be out under the title Was vernetzt ist angreifbar sometime in the year 2023. We're working also on a couple other translations. I'm most excited about Ukrainian translation, which I'd be happy to do for free, and that's still under discussion. Hopefully we can make it happen.
Good. Well, Mikko, I'll give you a bit of an introduction to start us off, but Mikko is the Chief Research Officer here at WithSecure and a worldwide authority on cybersecurity. Mikko was voted CISO Magazine's Person of the Year in 2020, has been featured in Vanity Fair, was listed in Foreign Policy's Top 100 Thinkers, and has given TED Talks among many other accolades and highlights in his career. So very lucky to have him with us today. Before we begin, I'd like to invite everyone to submit any questions via the question pane in the webinar control panel, which should be visible on the right side of your monitor. Our moderator and our North American marketing manager, Laura, will be feeding those to me as they come in, and we'll field as many of them as possible during today's session. So Mikko, thank you for joining us again. How's Helsinki?
Well, very dark. The days are getting shorter, as you know. The summers are very nice because days are very long. The winters are pretty tough because it's so dark. So pitch black outside, pretty cold, no snow yet.
Starting to get a little darker here in New York too. But so first, just to dive right in, Mikko, tell us a little bit about your inspiration for writing your book, If It's Smart, It's Vulnerable.
Well, it wasn't voluntary, really. The whole project starts from 2011. In 2011, I did my TED Talk, the big one, the one which has millions of views. And as soon as you do a TED Talk, I learned that you immediately get contacted by multiple agents and book publishers, and they all tell you the same story, that Mikko, you should write a book. All TED speakers write a book. And they were right, of course. That's a good idea. There's a big audience who wants to read more about the things you said. So I started writing a book. And at the same time, I sustained an unhealthy level of trouble. And I tried writing the book on planes and airport lounges, and I kept changing the topic, and it wasn't really going anywhere. 10 years later, the pandemic happens, and I'm out of excuses. I had no excuse not to write the book. So this was my COVID project. I wrote it during the pandemic. The book actually was published in Finnish, in my home language last year, and now it's published internationally in beginning of August. So a long time coming, and the topic changed multiple times, but in the end it became a pretty generic book. I've heard from a lot of people who've read the book that it's the kind of book they could give to their parents or neighbors who want to learn more about what we actually do, those of us who work in information security, because there's tons of stories. And the reason why there's so many stories is those are the kinds of books I like to read myself. One of my favorite authors, a fellow Finn, who only writes in Finnish, unfortunately, he writes these books which are filled with facts and statistics, and then stories, and then facts, and then stories. And it's really nice to keep you engaged. That's like this hard stuff that makes me think, and then there's stories, because we all like to hear and read stories. And I have plenty of stories after working in this field for over 30 years.
Yeah, and over 30 years, well, I guess more than 31 years at WithSecure, formerly F-Secure Business. And certainly I know from reading your book, which we have here, that you mentioned several people you've met with in that time, including bad actors. So who do you think made the biggest impression on you?
First big impression I got from the bad actors, from our enemies, were early virus writers in the 1990s who showed great skill And I couldn't figure out what made them tick. In particular, a particular virus writer called Dark Avenger, we still don't know who he was. We only know that he was Bulgarian. That's the only thing we know. He wrote many of the groundbreaking early viruses in the 1990s. For example, the first viruses which were using polymorphic encryption, which means every single generation of the malware was completely different from the previous one, which made the detection of these viruses with the early technology we had at the time very, very difficult. And this was such a mystery because at the time, the virus writers weren't getting any benefits out of their attacks. They weren't making any money. The first money-making malware only appeared around 2003, which I also explain in the book. But before that, we saw these really skilled, clearly very good programmers who would spend large amounts of their time for a project which they got no benefit out of and which only caused grief for others. And you really couldn't figure out why they were doing what they were doing. But already back then, we did come up with a healthy level of respect for the enemy. I can't understand why they're doing what they're doing, but some of them are skilled in what they do, and we have to respect that.
Hmm. And now, moving from the 90s to now, who are you most concerned with? Which groups?
If I have to name specific groups right now, it would be the largest Russian ransomware gangs like Lockbit or Ransom EXX or Alpha or Hive, maybe Quantum. I would name Conti, but Conti most likely disbanded 2 months ago because they got too much attention, sort of like what happened with Revil or REvil last year. Too many headlines and they disbanded and regrouped. Most likely some of these groups that I mentioned consist of existing members of the older groups which have disbanded and gotten rid of the old brand. It's interesting that these groups really do have brands. They have names, logos, they run websites because they need a reputation. They need a reputation that they will do what they threaten you with. If you don't pay, they will leak your files because they've done it so many times before. But they also need a reputation that they are fair, that if you pay the ransom, then they will deliver what they promise. So they need a reputation of honest criminals, which quite remarkably then turns into a situation where they need to be doing branding for their criminal brands, which is a bit weird, but that's where we are today. Now, there of course are other gangs as well, not just ransomware gangs, but these are the biggest money makers out there right now, and these are the ones I worry most about. One of the groups I mentioned, Ransom EXX, allegedly, they claim they hacked Ferrari last week, which we haven't been able to confirm, and Ferrari themselves say they have no signs of their data breach, but this group on their website in the Tor Hidden Service have been leaking document files which clearly are internal Ferrari documents. So it's an example of the level of targets these criminal groups are hitting right now.
Yeah, and in the book, you talk about not just taking on these groups from behind a computer screen. You actually talk about getting out there and meeting some folks in the field and getting face to face. So one question I did have was, outside of the book, outside of what was published, what's one of the craziest events or experiences you've been through?
It's a great question. When I was writing the book, I had a great publishing editor. I did write the book completely by myself. There's no ghostwriting involved whatsoever. But Ilona, who worked with me to actually edit the book, she was so great in deleting my stuff. Like I had a deadline every Friday. For 7 months, every Friday, I submitted Ilona with new texts, and she would go through them, and she was so kind. And yeah, what a great story, Mikko. I love it. Let's put this one to the next book, which means she just deleted it, which of course made this book much better, but many of the stories I did end up writing did not make it into the book. One story which I wrote, which is not there, is a tale on how we were trying to do a takedown together with the CERT-FI, that's the Computer Emergency Response Team run by the Finnish government. We were tracking down a particular botnet, which was causing a very widespread denial of service attack on SMTP servers around the world. So email wasn't working very well because this particular worm was sending so many infected emails. We cracked the servers for the command and control server, which means we actually had a list of IP addresses which should be blocked at ISPs around the world to shut down this malware from spreading further. So I tried mailing the list of these IP addresses to our colleagues at the CERT, and of course, mail went nowhere. I called them up and they didn't receive the email because email was down pretty much globally because of this massively large attack. So then I offered if I could fax it to them. This was 15 years ago or so. Well, they didn't have a fax. Like, who has a fax anymore? They certainly didn't. So what can we do? I printed out the list of IP addresses and I gave them to Yuzu, one of my teammates at the time. And I told him that, just hop into your car and drive to the government offices and just, deliver it by hand. So he hops into his car, he drives away, and there's a traffic jam, which we typically don't have in Helsinki. Helsinki is not a very big city, but there was a crash or something, so traffic wasn't moving anywhere, which then Yuzu abandons his car and runs for the rest of the trip, and then exhausted hand delivers the list of IP addresses, which they then block, and there's a happy ending there. But I remember how it just seems that everything was against us to try to stop access to these 10 IP addresses.
Yeah. Wow. Yeah. Sometimes it's not over the web. You actually have to run it.
Sometimes, yes. Yeah. It's sometimes necessary. I can tell you another story which didn't make it into the book. One of the things I detail in the book is this recent case of a psychotherapy center hack, the so-called case Vastaamo, which was a really sad case because it involved medical information, private psychotherapy notes done by therapists as they were doing therapy sessions, and the criminal was blackmailing the patients to pay bitcoins in order not to leak their information online. And there's a sad ending there instead of a happy ending because the criminal ended up leaking all the medical notes online. Now, this was bad, but in the end, they weren't that accessible. They were leaked as a tar archive, which you had to download from a website running in Tor hidden service, which means you need a little bit of technical knowledge to gain access. And even if you gain access to the database, it was a raw database with tens of thousands of patient records. So it's not that easy to understand, and it's encoded in different ways. 2 months after the data breach, someone else, not the original attacker, but someone else took this leaked database, formatted it nicely, and made a website on the public web, not in the Tor hidden service, with a search engine, which could be used by anyone with no technical skills whatsoever to search for anyone in the leaked database by their name, by their social security number, by their address, by their phone number, by their employer, by their city. And it would just show you full details, whatever he or she discussed with her or his therapist. And victims inside this leak included underage children. All of this was made really easily accessible to anyone. And that's, an example of the cases which I sometimes run into my line of work. And it really makes you at least briefly lose your hope in mankind. Like, who the hell would take the time to build a service like that, and for what? I mean, clearly the only outcome is that you're going to hurt a lot of people who are already hurt. And this information, yes, it was already accessible, but not nearly this accessible. And it just boggles the mind that someone goes through something like that, but someone did.
Yeah, and you talk a lot about, well, the internet's coming for better or worse. And if you think about yourself back in the early 1990s, back when you started your career at WithSecure, what do you think the world would look like in the 2000s, 2010s? Did you think it would be, I guess, more of a utopian type internet or dystopian?
I didn't see the technology revolution coming as large as it did. Of course, I've been a geek and a nerd all my life. I started programming as a 14-year-old. That's in 1984. So I've always had a computer. In fact, the reason why I've had access to computers all my life is that my mother, my late mother Rauha, she went to work with the State Computing Center already in 1968, when nobody was working with computers. When nobody was working with computers, my mom already was, which means when I was a small kid, my mom would bring home punch cards and punch tapes, which we used to store data, before magnetic media. I've been playing as a child with punched cards and tape, because mom would bring his or her work home with her. And that's the reason why I've always had access to computers. But I clearly didn't see a future where every home would have a computer. The idea that every home would have a computer made no sense to me, because back then I thought that only programmers need computers. And why would, a grandmother have a computer in their home or her home? I didn't see that becoming commonplace, and much less could I see these becoming as commonplace, that not only everybody would have a computer in their home, everybody would have a computer in their pocket. So that the revolution was much, much bigger than I thought. When the web came around, 1994 or so, I did see that as something which will become huge. But even when you see a revolution coming, it's hard to really see what's the big deal about the revolution. I'll give you an example. I set up the first website for this company in 1994. I had a personal homepage maybe a month before that. And those of you who don't remember what homepages were, they were basically like Facebook or LinkedIn pages, but they were not in a central server. You had your own server, or you had an access account in a server, and you had your own page. And if you wanted to have a homepage in 1994 or 1995, one of the challenges you had was how to get your picture on the homepage, because that's not obvious in 1994. Everybody were still using paper pictures. We were using film cameras, and the end result was your photos on paper. And moving that to a computer wasn't straightforward at all. We didn't have digital cameras. We didn't have mobile phones. So if you wanted to have your own photo on your web page, you needed to have access to a scanner. And that wasn't easy to come by. So I had an idea that, there would be a great idea for a startup company to simply start scanning people's paper photos so they could have their picture on the website. I thought that would be a great business idea. Well, I didn't do even that. But of course, now it seems ridiculous. That's such a small part of the revolution, but that seemed like an important part at the early times. So you see that something big is happening, but even then it might be hard to see what's the big deal about it.
And fast forwarding, even to the 2010s, after you I guess in the 1990s tried to think about what was going to happen in the future, and even up to now, how have your past predictions informed the predictions that you've even made in the book? Have you seen any trends or anything that's, I guess, helped you predict the future a little bit more accurately, you think? Although that sounds like a pretty dramatic statement, doesn't it?
Yeah, well, as part of my job, I've tried predicting the future, especially tried to predicting the movements of our enemies and the attacks for years and years. And that's hard. We've been lucky. We've been able to pinpoint some of the developments pretty accurately, which means we've been able to build defenses against them over the years. Sometimes we get it wrong. It's not that easy. For example, we did forecast attacks on mobile phones, but we forecasted them maybe 5 years too early. So it's easy to see it's going to happen. It's hard to see when exactly it's going to happen. It's actually easier to forecast the future in the far future than in the next 5 years or in the next 10 years or so. Predicting where we will be in 30 years is pretty obvious. All you have to do is look where we were a long time ago, where we are today, and where we're going next. And it's pretty linear. I mean, computers have been getting faster and faster, and they're cheaper and cheaper. This has been going on for years and years, decades and decades. We have more computing power, more storage, more bandwidth, more memory, and they're getting cheaper and cheaper. So the outcome is pretty obvious. We're headed towards limitless computing, access to limitless computing for free. That's the future. And now, don't take me literally. It's not going to be literally limitless and literally free, but close to limitless and close to free. That's where we will be in a couple of decades. And that's a great future, because it really changes the way we think about what we can build. I mean, if you would have no restrictions, what would you build? If you're a coder or a developer, and you would have access to the biggest possible environment, biggest possible system, biggest possible cloud for free, what would you build? And that's a great view of the future. And I truly believe that's the future that we're headed towards.
And Mikko, for the businesses that have joined, what does that mean, and what can you do about that right now to, I guess, grow your business and take advantage of that prediction?
Well, that prediction is so far away that that's the only practical thing you can do based on that today, is to realize that, data is money and money is data, which means even if your organization, even if your company isn't actively using data, for example, for machine learning systems, you will be doing it in the future. Today, the difference between successful and unsuccessful companies is how good you are in digitalization, and digitalization all revolves around data. So even if you're not using the data about your operations, about your clients, or about the way your applications or products work, you should be collecting it. Now, this comes with a big caveat. Collecting information also has a price, especially around privacy issues. But if you're able to collect mechanical data or anonymized data, even if you have no use for it today, you should still be collecting it and saving it. You will want to use that data when you're ready, because machine learning is the future. It's already here, and it's even more going to be directing companies in the future. And to build machine learning systems, you have to be able to teach them. And the way you teach machines is with data. You need data. Collect the data even if you don't know what to use it for. One of the examples on this that I mentioned in the book is Tesla. When the very first Model S shipped in 2014, they had around 1 million miles of sensor data collected from the Model S test models, which had been driving around California just to collect information with their radars and cameras. Today, they get more than 1 million miles of similar data a day, because they have so many cars on the roads, and every single one of those cars collect the data and sends it back to Tesla, which then uses that information to teach their systems to build better new versions of the applications in the cars themselves. So data is money, and money is data.
And looking out into the far future, you talk about AI and its potential to exponentially impact our lives and change our lives, or maybe just change technology, right? So, and you mentioned that there are still a lot of barriers to using it today. When do you think AI will be accessible enough for cyber criminals to start using it regularly?
Well, hopefully in the far future, practically in the near future. I wish, of course, criminals would never gain access to machine learning and AI-based systems, but it's very realistic that it's going to happen in the near future. In fact, we've been waiting for it for quite a while. Now, here, there's different ways criminals could use machine learning systems. One scenario which every now and then hits the press is that you could do very convincing deep fake sound or voice or video of people and use that to fool people and do scams, or maybe CEO scams or BEC scams, where they would have a deep fake using the appearance of the CFO of the company and contact the financial department to give orders, things like that. This actually regularly is mentioned that it's something which is already happening, which I don't think is true. We regularly get reports that some company was hit with an attack where they lost a lot of money, and they say that, yeah, we were hit with a deep fake, but they have no evidence of it happening, and it's could just be someone who sounded like the CEO, instead of being a real deep fake. I'm not saying we wouldn't have the technology to do deep fakes in real time. We do. I'm just saying we haven't seen any evidence that this would have already been used maliciously in these. It will be used, but I don't think, or we have had no evidence of it being happening already. The other thing which we've been waiting for is malware groups and ransomware groups to automate their operations using machine learning. And this is it's an interesting scenario. Security companies like ours, we've been building automation for many, many years. In fact, here at WithSecure, we started building our first machine learning project in 2005, which is 17 years ago, which is remarkably many years ago. So over these years, we've automated the way we find new attacks. We have these networks of honeynets and honeypots collecting information online. We intercept malicious samples and malicious attacks and exploits. We automatically import them into our systems. We automatically run these samples or exploit these exploits in different environments. We cross-reference the end results. We map them into previous attacks. We build detections automatically. We test the detections automatically, and we deploy them automatically, which means we, the defenders, we're working at machine speed. And at the very same time, the attackers are working at human speed. They're creating these attacks manually. They're writing a new piece of ransomware and testing it and deploying it, sending it out using spam email messages, which get blocked with filters, and then they will rewrite them manually, bypassing the filters. And these spam emails contain links to malicious websites, which sooner or later get blacklisted or blocked at gateways. So then they will register new domain names and set up new websites. And whenever their binaries, the actual ransomware, gets blocked by endpoint protection, they will rewrite the code and recompile and add layers of stuff around it, or encryption or stuff like that, to make it harder to detect. And we know all of this is done manually by the attackers because it's so slow. Like, we're working at computer speed, machine speed, they're working at human speed. We block something and it takes them hours or days to react to it, and then we react in minutes. So there's a huge difference in reaction times, which means when they will go to machine learning systems, when they will go to full automation, we will see it simply by looking at their reaction times. It's a game of ping pong, which suddenly picks up pace 100-fold. That's what it will look like, and it will happen in the next 12 months. That's my best guess. The main reasons why it hasn't happened yet is that these criminals have a hard time finding machine learning or AI experts who are willing to break the law. There's such a lack of skill in the area of creating frameworks for machine learning or utilizing things like TensorFlow for machine learning environments or AI systems. If you have these skills, you already have a very high likelihood of getting a really nice job, well-paid job anywhere in the world. And if that's the case, why would you go to the dark side? Why would you break the law if you don't need to? But clearly, that's not going to last forever. Eventually, the enemy will have access to these kind of skills, and then this will change. It simply hasn't changed yet.
Yeah, 12 months is a pretty short time horizon.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, if I'm correct, I said it first. If it doesn't happen, never mind.
Fair enough. Great. So now for some questions from our audience. Some of these were submitted during registration. Others we are receiving in real time. So we'll go through as many as we can. Are you ready for the rapid fire, Mikko?
I am.
When/if the internet becomes more restrictive or stop being open source, what do you think would be the new approach for hackers?
Internet is based on open source, but big part of the users are using it from closed source environments. Sure, Linux runs the internet. Most of the websites on the world are running on open source servers and running open source technology. Then again, users are sitting on their iPhones and on their Windows laptops, which are closed source. So open source is the single biggest revolution in joint development of systems, and it really has changed the world. And I write about this and about Linus Torvalds, the creator of the Linux kernel, in the book, and mention that he is the most important Finn who has ever lived, which I think is a fair assumption. But open source has its problems. Over the last 5, 6, 7 years, we've seen multiple cases of very, very common open source libraries, which are used by basically all the companies or all the major companies on the planet. And then drastic security vulnerabilities are found in them, and then when we look at why they've had security vulnerabilities, turns out that the whole project was done by 5 guys or 10 guys, which is ridiculous. And we have these really important pieces of code maintained as hobby projects or side projects. Now, the way to fix this, we already know, and it's already underway. Some of the largest companies in the world are funding audits of the most important open source libraries, and I believe that is one of the things we really should be doing. Now, is open source good for hackers, like criminal hackers, or is it bad for hackers? It's both. You could argue that it's easier to find vulnerabilities from source code when you can read the source code. Then again, it's easier to fix the vulnerabilities when anybody can fix them. So I don't see open source going away anytime soon, and I think it's one of the best things which has happened to computing ever.
Next question, AI is self-constraining. It does not allow for creative choices. How can we ensure AI is not only used in an advisory role?
Well,
how can we ensure AI is only used in an advisory role?
How is AI only used in an advisory role? Fun fact, we won't be able to do that. We can hope, but we will fail. There's a competition, there's a race into who will be the first entity on the planet to create superhuman artificial intelligence. And I'm not going to go into detail, what superhuman really means here, because it's going to be narrow silos of superhuman intelligence. But clearly, we already see computers beating us in the kinds of things we traditionally didn't realize they could beat us. They are more creative. They write better. They code better than humans, and that's only going to ramp up. How are we going to keep them in advisory position? I don't see how that's going to work out at all. I think we won't. I think we will see computers to start to call the shots in ways that we can't control anymore, which is a bad idea, but I think it's going to happen anyway. And the reason why this is going to happen, that there's a race. Like I said, there's companies and organizations who want to be the first. There's millions and millions of money being poured into creating these artificial intelligence systems, and everybody wants to have something superior to their competitors. And when you are in a race, the thing you don't do is to stop and look around and make sure you're doing things carefully and safely. So it might very well be that we will end up in a future where computers will have roles which are not just advisory, but superior to us. And introducing a superior intelligence into our own biosphere seems to be a basic evolutionary mistake, which we are bound to do.
The next is a 3-part question. What new technologies are you most excited about, most fearful of, and any connections between the two?
All right, what I'm most excited about right now, AI frameworks which enable image creation. And I guess most of us have seen examples of these, DALL-E or the Google, the name escapes me right now, but they're a clone of DALL-E. And then most importantly, Stable Diffusion. I actually met the head developer of Stable Diffusion graphics engine last week in Germany. He's from the Munich Institute of Technology. It's a European project which is completely open source, unlike the other competing AI graphics creation engines. And they show us a glimpse into the future where computers are more creative than humans. And I do believe that we will see a future where computers will beat us in creative things. They will be better artists. They will compose better songs. They will write better poems. The songs they write will have better lyrics. The code they write will be better than what human coders can write. And I know what this sounds like, and I hate this as much as you do. But I think it's going to happen. And when I say that they will be writing better poems than humans, I mean better poems that we all would agree that, yeah, these are better ones. Like the poems written by this machine have more meaning, are deeper, are more touching than poems written by humans. I think they will be able to do that. And that sucks, but I think it's going to happen anyway. So why am I excited about, for example, stable diffusion? Well, it's both. It's exciting and scary at the same time. Technology does that. It is able to create new things which are amazing in what they're able to do, so amazing that it's a little bit scary. Then we do have also technologies which I'm worried about. I'll mention, for example, Monero here, which is a cryptocurrency. Why am I mentioning a particular cryptocurrency? Well, we all know Bitcoin, and we know criminals love Bitcoin. We know ransomware gangs use Bitcoin. Sure. But Bitcoin is based on the Bitcoin blockchain, which is an open blockchain, public blockchain. Basically, the innovation behind Bitcoin is that Satoshi Nakamoto, the creator of Bitcoin, invented a new type of a ledger where every transaction is public forever and unchangeable forever. That's all. If you ignore the math and the cryptography in it, this is what he invented, a ledger where every transaction is public forever and unchangeable forever. And it sounds so basic that, that's it. Yes, that's it. It's such a big innovation because it's so simple. It sounds like a no-brainer, but no one invented it before. Satoshi Nakamoto invented it in 2009. But the thing that bothers criminals is the public part. When they collect ransom payments in Bitcoin and put them in their wallets, we see that it's a public blockchain. We see every transaction. If they try to hide the money and move it from their wallet to another wallet, we see that as well. Then they move it further, we see that as well. So every transaction is public. We can track the money movements. Now, this, of course, they know. So they try to hide their money movements by splitting it into, thousands of wallets or using shared wallets. But practically, the thing they really do to hide their money movements is to move it away from the public blockchain of Bitcoin into Zcash or Monero or other double-blind blockchains, which are more anonymous, built exactly for the purpose of making it a non-public blockchain where transactions cannot be tracked. And I know very well what was the idea behind Monero and other similar fully anonymous cryptocurrencies. It's about privacy. It should be as private as cash. We like that. But when I look at where Monero is being used, as I spend my days in Tor hidden service, I see it only being used to do awful things. Stolen credit card numbers are bought with Monero. Guns are bought with Monero. Stolen information is traded with Monero. I don't think I ever see anything legal done with Monero. And that's an example of an innovation or of a technology which, I mean, in theory, it's neutral. In theory, it's just a tool. It's something you can use for bad or good. What I'm saying is that it's mostly used for bad. It's worrying. And the thing about innovations is that once we've invented something, we cannot uninvent it. We cannot put the cat back into the bag. The only way we can try to restrict use of technology we've invented is to make it illegal. And that's very complex because when we make something illegal, of course, criminals will still use it because they break the laws to begin with. That's why they're criminals. So it's hard. And that's one of the technologies that worries me.
We've got a more general question here. What about the security of Internet of Things?
The household appliances we buy into our homes are all going online. I guess we all know this. It's been going on for a couple of years, but it's only really beginning. Because right now, the connected devices we have in our homes are the devices that we know are online. You know that your TV is online because you're watching Netflix from it. You know that your fridge is online because it has cameras inside and you can look inside your fridge from your phone. You know that your security cameras are online because you can watch them from anywhere in the world. That's not what I'm worried about. I'm more worried about connected devices where the users don't even know that they are online. stupid devices going online, not smart devices, but stupid devices. What would be an example? Well, for example, a kitchen mixer. The kitchen mixer you use to beat up your eggs. You will never need an app for that. You, the consumer, the owner of that mixer, you don't want it to be online. But what I'm saying is that even those will be going online. And the reason why they're going online is that it's good for the manufacturers. They would like to collect data. Data is money. Money is data. Let's collect data. We make kitchen mixers. How do we collect data? Let's put a chip inside the mixers, and then we know where our customers are, where in the world, which cities, which part of the cities. And this is useful for marketing purposes and for many other reasons. And the vendors who build their IoT devices with security in mind have to spend more money into building their devices more secure. And the most important selling point for consumer electronics is price. When we go shopping for a washing machine, we don't ask questions about firewalls or intrusion prevention mechanisms inside the washing machine. No, we ask how much is it? That's the number one price, which means the companies which invest in cybersecurity end up with a more expensive product, which is not as competitive, because the features gained are the features that nobody's asking for. And it is more expensive because they had to spend more money to build it. And this is a market failure. And the way we in our Western societies handle market failures is with regulation. And I'm not a big fan of regulation, but if you're going to regulate something, maybe we should be regulating the liabilities for damages created by shortcomings and vulnerabilities in IoT devices. This wouldn't be so far-fetched because we already regulate things like fire safety and electrical safety. So you can be pretty sure that your brand new washing machine is not going to catch fire and it's not going to give you an electric shock because we've regulated these things. They go through different certification systems and tests. But the very same washing machine will most likely have, vulnerabilities which will enable anyone to steal your Wi-Fi passwords, which will then lead to your home network getting hacked with a ransomware gang because you had a vulnerable washing machine. And the way to fix that is to make the washing machine manufacturer liable for the damages created by their buggy code. That's a solution which I'm not really holding my breath to see anytime soon, but I think that's the direction where we're headed.
And another question, speaking of data is money, do you, Mr. Hypponen, usually accept or reject a website's cookies on your first visit to any given website?
I am not worried about cookies. And the cookies is a great example of the kind of regulation which I think is failing. The so-called cookie law, which started from the EU and is now pretty universal, means that whenever you visit the website, you get this goddamn box, which everybody just clicks to make it go away. That's what we do. We've been, trained to do that. The mouse immediately clicks the button to make it go away. I know the logic why we wanted to build this into our websites, to increase the awareness of tracking for our personal data being done by different websites. I don't think it reached its goals. It was a noble cause, but I don't think it worked in the end. People simply don't care. And most, sites, we need to have some level of cookies for sites to work. And of course, there's tons of cookies which can be used to track users' movement through the web as well. But the way I handle this problem is that I regularly simply empty the cookies in my browser altogether. I also use multiple browsers. I use one set of browsers for specific sites such as social media, and then other browser for searching Google, for example, which makes it narrower to what I'm exposing to these different trackers. And I guess I'm saved partially by the fact that I don't use services like Facebook at all, which has a very drastic level of tracking that they do for their users, not just on Facebook, but everywhere around the web.
In your opinion, how much longer do you think we will have to use the technology of the inherently insecure TCPIP protocol stack?
I don't think TCPIP is going to die anytime soon. In fact, I'm a bit of a fan for TCPIP. it's faring surprisingly well for a protocol which is 50 years old, for a protocol which started from designing a network structure which would be strong enough to survive a nuclear war. The basic idea is so brilliant. When you send a data package, if it doesn't reach its end, it's simply going to retry routing to a different route. The end result is a very durable network. If the package of data doesn't get through, it will retry, even go around the world if that's necessary to reach the point where it's trying to go. 50 years later, we're still using it, and it's still working surprisingly well. I think we have much more problematic old protocols to worry about first before overhauling TCPIP. Protocols such as SMTP, which we still use for email, or BGP, which we use for online routing, which both are also horribly insecure. But at least TCPIP doesn't really require any specific knowledge on the users or any kind of user account or anything like that. It doesn't even need to be secure in the sense that we would be requiring for more higher level protocols. TCP/IP will be with us for a very long time. I believe it's one of those early innovations which have fared surprisingly well.
How should we prepare to defend against attackers utilizing machine learning automation in their attacks in the next 12 months?
We are already ready for that. All security companies, not just us, but basically all security companies nowadays heavily rely on machine learning. We had to. I remember when we started our first machine learning project, it was simply because we couldn't keep up with the amount of stuff we had to analyze. We were just overwhelmed with the amount of attacks and network flows and exploits and malware samples. Regardless of how many analysts we were hiring, we couldn't keep up. So we realized that we have to automate this. We have to start automating the work of the human analysts if we want to keep up. End result, over 15 years later, is that we've automated the whole lab process, and we can work at speeds we could not have imagined 15 years ago. We can keep up with machine learning attacks from the enemy with the current technology. In fact, I do believe that the only thing which can fight an evil machine learning framework is a good machine learning framework, and we have those already.
What happens when quantum computers fall into criminal hands?
Oh, that's a great question. Oh boy. My first reaction is that that's not going to happen. Like, how would they ever get their hands on a quantum computer? I guess it could happen. Last month, I actually visited a quantum computing factory, which is making quantum computers as we speak. There's plenty of quantum computers being developed by companies like Google or IBM. I think all of them are only doing it for research purposes at the moment. The factory I visited is the only one, at least by their own account, which has actually sold quantum computers. They've sold 2 of them. So this is how early the business still is. Like the leading quantum computing company has sold 2 quantum computers, each of which had 5 qubits, which is still far from enough to be able to do things like crack encryptions. For that, you would need maybe 100 qubits. But we are getting there. So eventually, it's going to be there. So how would criminals get these? I don't know. Break in and steal one. How would they know how to operate it? I don't know. It's not going to happen anytime soon. But we should probably still worry about malicious use of quantum computing, even though it might not be in the hands of criminals, because the malicious attackers could be intelligence agencies. And there, the varying scenario is, well, we know that quantum computers can crack most of the existing encryption algorithms. And there, the risk really is that someone, this might very well be an intelligence agency, is collecting vast amounts of encrypted data today, which they cannot crack today, but they save it for future. And then one day they can crack it with quantum technology, and then they go back into your history and see everything you've discussed encrypted over the last 20 years, which could then be used to twist your arm. Something like that, which is worrying. And that's why what we should be doing right now is to move into quantum-proof encryption algorithms faster and faster. It's a tough thing to accomplish because we have to replace very basic building blocks of the internet. For example, HTTPS is using TSL encryption algorithms, which are all prone to breaking with quantum. Those would have to be replaced with quantum-proof algorithms, which means we have to upgrade every single web server, every single mobile phone, every single browser, which is going to take years and years, but we must start now because the date of quantum computers cracking existing algorithms is getting closer. And these quantum-proof algorithms exist. We have them already. A great example is the fact that the Bitcoin blockchain, again, Satoshi Nakamoto, 2009, wrote the blockchain to be quantum-proof. If you use a new address for every transaction, the transactions cannot be cracked with a quantum computer. I don't know who Satoshi Nakamoto was, but he sure was ahead of its time.
Next, how resilient do you see the internet? What are the biggest risks globally for its stability?
Internet is not as resilient as we think it is. The main reason keeping it running as well as it runs is that the internet has no enemies. And I know that sounds a bit weird, but let me explain. Sure, you could write attacks which would, I don't know, launch massive attacks against the DNS root servers or overwhelm every single SMTP server on the planet or what have you. Sure, you could do drastic attacks against the core functions of the internet, but who would like to do that? Criminals? No. Criminals need the internet to make money. The last thing they want to do is to crash the internet. Spies? No. Spies love the internet. That's how they collect all the information. The last thing they want to do is to crash the internet. Activists? Well, no. Activists love internet more than anyone else. The last thing they want to crash is the internet. The only group I could imagine would be offensive military powers during war. Russia has tried cutting off Ukraine from the internet multiple times during this war, but that's not crashing the internet, that's crashing the connectivity in one country. If I would have to guess that if there would be any group which would like to crash the internet as a whole, that would have to be some kind of an extremist or terrorist organization who hates the whole idea of free and open information and free and open networks and Western values and would like to crash the internet. That might be possible, but these groups don't seem to have the know-how and expertise to do this. It's quite surprising, but we haven't seen cyber terrorism yet. The way terrorist groups use the internet today is for communication, for radicalization, for propaganda, for communication among themselves, but they are not using the internet to do terror attacks, which is totally doable, but we haven't seen it yet, and that's great.
What kinds of tasks or jobs will be available for human malware analysts as AI is taking their jobs away?
I think this is some kind of a trick question. Let me think for an answer. Well, okay, I don't have to come up with any future scenarios. We see this happening here. I'm at our headquarters in Helsinki right now. We see this happening here at our headquarters every single day. Most of the work is done by machines, but not all of it is done by machines. When we end up with tricky cases, when we end up with cases where the machine cannot decide, then it is escalated to humans. So humans still are in charge. Humans oversee the machine learning systems. Humans teach the machine. So when we end up with, let's say, a new exploit, which the systems we run cannot figure out, cannot understand what it's trying to do, or new piece of malware, which our engines don't know if it's good or bad. They analyze it, they cross-reference it, but in the end, they don't know if they should block it or allow it. When this is escalated to humans, we humans don't analyze it and solve the problem for the machine. No, we adjust and teach the machine until it's able to make the call by itself, because then it will be able to make the call for this sample and for all future samples. So there might very well be time in the future when all malware analysis work, and I guess all coding and development work will be done by machines, but it's not any time soon. I think there's plenty of work to be done by us humans. And I do think there is job security in security for decades to come.
Very good. And it looks like that's the last of our questions. A quick word from our sponsor, WithSecure. WithSecure provides first element security, which is comprised of vulnerability management, endpoint protection, endpoint detection response, Office 365, as well as cloud protection for Salesforce product, managed detection response services, and a myriad of consulting services. If you are interested in speaking with us and our teams, please reach out. Thank you for joining. And Mikko, any last words?
Someone asked me if I'm already working on the next book. The answer is no. Writing this one was hard work. I'll maybe start a new project in a couple of years, the earliest. I'm really happy this one is finished and it's available now. So thank you.
Very good. Thank you, Mikko. Thank you, everyone.